Hi, this is Dr. Joe with Conversations That Matter, Bits and Pieces. And this is a mind and imagination card from Cards for Bearing the Unbearable. What time of day does grief impact you most? How might you make space for grief then? This is a pretty easy question for me because it's the time of day that's the most quiet. And that is in the early mornings when I first wake up, or late at night when I'm going to bed. Do you have that experience too? I think part of it is like during the day we're busy and we're preoccupied, but there's something about quiescence that really brings grief into the foreground. So, for example, in early grief, I remember when I would first wake up in the morning, it felt like Groundhog Day, like, oh my God. Charlie's mom, Liz, calls it waking up into a nightmare. It's like you open your eyes and you're like, did this really happen? Oh yeah, and then it hits you. Yeah, this really did happen, and this wasn't just a nightmare. And it's just Groundhog Day over and over and over again. And it's just this intense grief that presents and represents itself every single morning. That happened for quite a while. It's not intense like that 30 years later, of course. Well, maybe it is intense, but I've built emotional muscle, of course. But then also in the evening, like as I'm going to sleep, sometimes if grief is asking to be seen, it definitely steps into the foreground in the evening too, because it's a wind down time. And so sometimes I'm thinking deeply about things that have happened throughout the day, about families with whom I've communicated or worked that day, or my grief research or something. And so grief comes into the foreground when other things aren't. And I think that's why it's so important for us to make time for grief. Not just when it's forced, like in the morning when you're kind of in between sleep and wake, or in the evening as you're winding down. What about you? When does grief really come into the foreground for you, and how could you make space for it? I look forward to hearing your responses. This is Dr. Joe with Conversations That Matter. Thank you for joining.